$10,000 to play a part in a little drama. When it's over, I'll give you another 40. My girlfriend Ava's best friend, Jane, stood shifting her weight in front of me. She was reciting the lines Ava had coached her on, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands twisting the hem of her worn-out jacket. I knew she needed the money. They had just found a kidney match for her mom, but the surgery costs were staggering, and she was still short by a mile. Ava was using that, leveraging Jane's desperation to force her into this disgusting little play. Best friend seduces boyfriend. All Ava wanted was a respectable excuse to break up with me, so she could run off with some tech bro who'd been flashing his money at her lately. I looked at Jane's trembling eyelashes, and, to my own surprise, I smiled. I pulled 2 documents from my briefcase and slid them across the coffee table toward her. One was a prenuptial agreement drafted weeks ago. The other was a surgical payment confirmation from Mercy General Hospital, with my name listed as the payer. $50,000 is too little, and it lacks imagination. I watched her eyes go wide, and I spoke each word with precision. Jane, marry me. After 1 year, we divorce, and you walk away with $1 million. Jane's pupils contracted to pinpricks. Her head snapped up, her expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and the distinct panic of someone whose entire world had just been turned inside out. What? What did you say? Her voice was a whisper, laced with a tremor she couldn't control. I said, I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locking onto hers. Marry me. Be my wife for 1 year. Your mother's surgery, all her follow-up care and recovery costs. I'll cover everything. After a year, we part ways amicably, and you'll receive a $1 million bonus for your time. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioner. Jane's face cycled through a spectrum of colors, from flushed red to stark white. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at me as if I were a complete stranger. I knew that in her world, in Ava's world, I was just Logan Caldwell, a guy from a decent family with a boring 9-to-5 job, suddenly producing $1 million and solving a medical crisis that had her running herself into the ground was completely outside her frame of reference. Logan, she finally found her voice, but it was edged with suspicion. Who are you? Where did you get this kind of money? Who I am doesn't matter, I said calmly. What matters is that I can solve your problems. I pushed the hospital payment confirmation a little closer to her. You can call Mercy General right now to verify this. The surgeon is Dr. Matthews, head of nephrology. He's the best in the country. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. I paused, then added a final detail. Dr. Matthews is an old family friend. It's a favor only I could call in. That last part was a half-truth, but it was enough to explain how I'd pulled it off. Jane's eyes were glued to the paper, the hospital's official letterhead and signature clear as day. Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone and actually dialed a number. When a nurse on the other end confirmed the surgery, the time, and that all fees had been paid in full, her phone slipped from her grasp, landing silently on the thick rug. All the strength seemed to drain out of her. She had come here ready to sell her dignity for $50,000. Instead, I had offered her a chance to trade a year of her life in a sham marriage for a new future. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table, a perfectly timed interruption. The screen lit up with 3 letters. Ava. I didn't hide it. Right there in front of Jane, I hit the speakerphone button. Hey, Logan. Ava's voice came through, dripping with a poorly concealed, gloating tone. So, how are things over there? Did Jane make it? I glanced at Jane, who was still frozen in place, and answered flatly. She's here. And did she, say anything to you? Ava's voice was electric with anticipation. I picked up the heavy fountain pen from the table, spinning it between my fingers. She did. She tried to seduce me. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by Ava's theatrical gasp. Oh my God. How could she? Logan, don't you fall for it. I knew she was trouble you. Ava, I cut her performance short. I got your little test. But I have to say, I think Jane would make a much better wife than you. Dead silence. For a full 10 seconds, nothing. I could practically picture the look of disbelief on Ava's face. Logan, what are you talking about? Are you insane? The pretense was gone, her voice now shrill and incredulous. It's exactly what it sounds like. I slid the prenup a little closer to Jane. I just proposed to Jane, and she's considering it. So, Ava, we're through. No, that's impossible. Logan, have you lost your mind? Are you just saying this to piss me off? I have no reason to be angry with you. My voice was devoid of emotion. You're the one who pushed your best friend in my direction, and I just happened to think it was a good idea. Without giving her another chance to speak, I ended the call. The world was finally quiet. I looked at Jane. She was still reeling from the successive shocks. Now, I said softly, you have a choice. Take the $50,000 from Ava and keep worrying about your mother's bills. Or sign this agreement and solve all your problems. Jane's gaze slowly moved from my face to the payment confirmation on the table. When she registered the amount and the paid in full stamp, her body gave a violent shudder. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. Jane eventually picked up the pen. Her fingertips were ice cold, trembling slightly. She used every ounce of her strength to sign her name at the bottom of the agreement. The nib of the pen scratched against the thick paper. Logan, she set the pen down and looked up, her eyes bloodshot but incredibly steady. I need to confirm a few things. Go ahead. First, is this agreement legally binding? My personal attorney drafted it. Every word is ironclad, I replied. Second, my mother's surgery. It's really all set. You saw the confirmation. The surgeon is Dr. Matthews, the best in the country. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. It's the first one on his schedule. Third, she took a deep breath. What exactly do I have to do this year? I admired her composure. To stay this rational under the circumstances, to ask the most critical questions, proved I hadn't made the wrong choice. You need to play the part of my wife. A wife who is deeply in love with me. I looked at her. We'll need to live together, deal with my family, and attend certain functions. To the outside world, we are a devoted couple. And in private, she asked the most important question of all. In private, we are business partners. We don't interfere in each other's lives. We respect each other's space. The agreement is very clear. We're a couple in name only. There is no requirement to fulfill any spousal duties. Hearing that, the tension in Jane's body visibly melted away. It was the relief of someone who had just survived a disaster. Okay, she nodded. I'll do it. Mrs. Caldwell. I stood up and extended my hand. A pleasure doing business with you. Jane hesitated for a second, then stood and shook my hand. Her hand was small and cold in mine. The next morning, I drove to pick Jane up. She had just one small, battered suitcase. Is that everything? I asked. Yeah, I don't have much, she answered quietly. I didn't press. I started the car and headed for City Hall. The drive was silent, the atmosphere in the car charged with a strange tension. It wasn't until I parked in front of the building that Jane seemed to make a decision. She turned to me. Logan, I still feel like none of this is real. You'll get used to it, I said. The process of getting the license was shockingly fast. Photos, forms, a stamp. In less than half an hour, 2 official certificates were in our hands. As the clerk stamped the final document, I saw Jane flinch, an almost imperceptible shudder. Walking out of City Hall, the sunlight was harsh. I looked at the new marriage certificate in my hand and felt nothing. It was just proof of a transaction, a tool that would allow me to secure my inheritance and get Ava out of my life for good. Where are we going now? Jane's voice pulled me back to the present. Home, I said simply. Our new home. Jane didn't ask any more questions. She just followed me to the car in silence. We drove through the city, eventually turning into a gated community of sprawling mansions. I had never brought Ava here. When the car stopped in front of a 3-story, modern villa, Jane's face was once again a mask of pure shock. This is where we'll be living for next year, I said, undoing my seatbelt. My grandfather left it to me. Just as I finished speaking, my phone vibrated. It was a text from my family's longtime butler, Stuart. The message was simple. Young master, the lawyer from the estate has arrived. The observation period officially begins the moment you step through that door. I put my phone away and looked at Jane. Ready, Mrs. Caldwell. Our first scene is about to begin. The front door had a keypad lock. I punched in a code, and the door swung open. A faint scent of fresh linen and lemon polish greeted us. Stuart had clearly had the house prepared. In the foyer stood an older man in a crisp, gray suit, his silver hair combed perfectly. It was Stewart. Behind him stood a middle-aged man in a sharp business suit, wearing gold-rimmed glasses and carrying a leather briefcase. That was my grandfather's personal attorney, Mr. Warren. Master Logan, Mrs. Caldwell. Stewart bowed slightly, a smile on his face that was both warm and appraising. Mr. Warren pushed his glasses up his nose, his gaze sweeping over us before settling on Jane. Logan, this is your wife? Mr. Warren's tone was flat, impossible to read. She is. I stepped forward and naturally took Jane's hand, pulling her to my side. Her palm was cold and damp with sweat. I could feel how nervous she was. I squeezed her hand gently, a silent gesture of reassurance. Mr. Warren, Stewart, I'd like you to meet my wife, Jane. I turned my head and gave Jane a soft smile. Jane, this is Mr. Warren and Stewart, two of my family's oldest friends. Jane was a quick study. She immediately wiped the anxiety from her face, returned my smile with one that was a bit shy but perfectly appropriate, and then turned to the two men. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Her voice was quiet but clear. Stewart's smile deepened as he nodded. Mr. Warren remained impassive. He opened his briefcase and took out a file. Logan, according to your grandfather's last will and testament, upon your marriage, a 1-year family observation period will commence. He looked me straight in the eye as he spoke. During this year, you and your wife must reside in this house, the Willows. The family trust will periodically assess the state of your marriage. The assessment will cover your marital harmony, personal conduct, and loyalty to the family. He paused, a glint in his eye from behind the lenses. 1 year from now, if the assessment is satisfactory, you will officially inherit a 51% controlling stake in Caldwell Industries. If it is not satisfactory, the shares will be managed by your uncle, Mr. Arthur Caldwell, until your next marriage passes the observation period. I knew all of this by heart. I understand, I replied calmly. Mr. Warren closed the file, his gaze shifting back to Jane. Ms. Miller, as Logan's wife, you are a central focus of this observation. I trust you understand the importance of your role. It was less of a reminder and more of a warning. Jane's back was ramrod straight. I understand, Mr. Warren. I will be a good wife to Logan. Her answer was poised and respectful, which surprised me a little. Mr. Warren couldn't seem to find any fault with it. He gave a slight nod and said no more. Well then, Master Logan, Mrs. Caldwell, it's been a long day. Your rooms are prepared. Please, go on up and rest, Stewart said, stepping in to smooth things over. I kept hold of Jane's hand as we walked up the sweeping spiral staircase. I didn't let go until we were inside the master bedroom with the door firmly closed, cutting off any eyes from downstairs. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Jane immediately pulled her hand back, her palm slick with sweat. That was terrifying, she whispered, a hand on her chest. That was just the appetizer. I walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and watched Mr. Warren's car pull away from the curb. The real battle hasn't even started. Jane came to stand beside me, following my gaze. Is your whole family that intense? Intense. I chuckled. They're just trying to figure out what kind of score to give the new bride. Jane fell silent. The master bedroom was enormous, decorated in a cool, modern style of black, white, and gray. A king-sized bed sat in the center of the room, impossible to ignore. The sight of it made the air between us awkward all over again. Jane pointed to a small door off to the side. Can I sleep in the guest room? No, I said instantly. Stewart will be checking in daily. We have to sleep in the same room. Jane's face flushed. But, don't worry. I pointed to a long sofa against the opposite wall. I'll sleep there. It was the best solution for now. Just then, the doorbell rang. Jane and I looked at each other, confused. Who will be visiting now? Stewart's voice came over the intercom. Master Logan, it's your uncle. Mr. Arthur is here. My uncle, Arthur Caldwell. My eyes narrowed. The vultures were already circling. He really couldn't wait a single day. Let's go, Mrs. Caldwell. I took Jane's hand again. Time to meet the matchmaker who made all this possible. My uncle, Arthur Caldwell, looks like a kind man. He's always smiling, wears rimless glasses, and speaks in a slow, measured tone that gives him the air of a thoughtful academic. Only our family knows what a greedy, vicious heart beats beneath that friendly mask. When Jane and I came downstairs, he was sitting on the living room sofa, slowly sipping the tea Stuart had prepared for him. The moment he saw us holding hands, his smile widened. "Logan, my boy, getting married is such a big deal. Why didn't you say a word to your uncle?" He stood up, affecting the warm posture of a concerned elder. If Mr. Warren hadn't called me, I'd still be completely in the dark. His eyes landed on Jane, raking over her from head to toe without any attempt at subtlety. And this must be my new niece, absolutely radiant. "Hello, my dear. I'm Logan's uncle, Arthur Caldwell." "Hello, uncle," Jane said, her greeting a little stiff. "Don't just stand there. Sit, sit." Arthur beckoned enthusiastically, waiting for us to take the sofa before settling into the armchair opposite us, a position perfect for interrogation. "Logan," he looked at me, his voice laced with mock sympathy. "Weren't you and that lovely Ava girl doing so well? What happened? To break up and then so quickly?" He left the sentence hanging, but his meaning was clear. He was questioning me and testing Jane. Before I could answer, Jane spoke first. "Uncle, when it comes to matters of the heart, there's rarely a right or wrong." Her voice was soft, but her words were crisp. "Logan and Ms. Sinclair broke up because they weren't right for each other. Logan and I are together because we found a connection." As she finished, she turned to me and gave me a sweet, loving smile. The performance was so natural it almost startled me. I immediately squeezed her hand in return, my eyes full of adoration. "Uncle, I know what I'm doing." The smile on Arthur's face tightened for a second. He probably hadn't expected the quiet-looking Jane to be so difficult to handle. His eyes darted back and forth, and he changed tactics. Well, I suppose I just don't understand you young people." He picked up his teacup, blowing on the surface. "But you know, that Ava girl came to the house, crying yesterday." He set the cup down with a sigh. "Said you'd thrown her over for another woman, that you made her feel worthless. She also said that this Ms. Miller here was her best friend, that she let a wolf into her own home." That sentence landed like a bomb in the quiet living room. Stuart stood off to the side, perfectly still, his eyes on the floor. I could feel the hand I was holding turn icy and rigid. My uncle's move was toxic. He was trying to brand us as an adulterer and a homewrecker right from the start. If that rumor got out, it would put us at a massive disadvantage during the observation period. "Oh, really?" I smiled. I looked at my uncle's phony, sanctimonious face. "And did Ava happen to tell you that she was the one who asked Jane to come test my loyalty?" Arthur's expression froze again. "Did she mention that she'd already found a richer guy and just needed an excuse to break up with me?" With every question, Arthur's face grew darker. "Did she tell you that her so-called richer guy is actually your own precious son, my dear cousin, Mason Caldwell?" When the name Mason Caldwell left my lips, the smile on Arthur's face finally vanished completely. He stared at me, his eyes cold and predatory, all pretense gone. I knew the first battle between us had just begun. He never thought I'd be aware of his little scheme. The air in the living room grew thick, almost suffocating. Just as the tension reached its peak, Jane's finger gently scratched the palm of my hand. I paused, looking at her. She gave me a tiny shake of her head, a silent plea in her eyes. I understood immediately. It wasn't time to go scorched earth. Not yet. I took a deep breath, reined in my anger, and put on a calm expression. "Uncle, let's just let the past be the past," I said, softening my tone. "Right now, all I want is to build a life with Jane." Arthur seized the opportunity to de-escalate, forcing another ugly smile onto his face. Yes, of course. What's past is past." He stayed for a few more minutes, making pointless small talk before finally getting up to leave. As I watched him walk away, my expression turned to ice. "Thank you," I said to Jane. "For what?" "For stopping me back there. If it wasn't for her, I might have impulsively laid all my cards on the table. It would have felt good, but it would have put my uncle on high alert, making my future plans much more difficult to execute." "We're partners now," Jane said, looking at me seriously. "Your business is my business." Her words stirred something unexpected inside me. That night, after we'd both showered, I picked up my pillow and a blanket, ready for the sofa. "Wait!" Jane's voice stopped me. She was standing by the bed, looking hesitant. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Stuart, She said in a low voice, "Do you think you might do a spot check in the middle of the night?" Her question made me pause. A spot check? Knowing Stuart's meticulous nature and his loyalty to my grandfather, it wasn't out of the question. If he found us sleeping separately, our first day's assessment would be marked marital discord. "You have a point," I said thoughtfully. The king-sized bed suddenly felt like an insurmountable obstacle. "So, what do we do?" Jane's cheeks were flushed. I looked at her, then at the bed. "There's only one option," I said. 10 minutes later, I was lying on the far left side of the bed, and Jane was on the far right. Between us was a formidable wall built from pillows and a rolled-up duvet. We were both lying perfectly straight, like soldiers at attention, neither of us daring to move. The air was thick with embarrassment. I could even hear the sound of her slightly ragged breathing. Good night," I said, breaking the silence. "Good night." Her reply was barely a whisper. I barely slept a wink that night. The next morning, just as we suspected, Stuart arrived early. He brought breakfast and then casually glanced into our still messy bedroom. When he saw the rumpled sheets on the single, large bed, a satisfied smile spread across his face. Jane and I exchanged a look of mutual, profound relief. The days started to fall into a routine. Our cohabitation slowly became normal. During the day, we were busy with our own things, but at night, we'd have dinner together in the villa, then retreat to our room to continue our act of being a couple who slept in the same bed but lived in different worlds. Our teamwork got better and better. In front of Stuart, we were a loving couple who could communicate with just a glance. Behind closed doors, we were polite, respectful roommates. During this time, my uncle didn't visit again. I knew he was watching from the shadows, waiting for us to slip up. Ava and Mason seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. Then, about a week later, I got a call from a friend. "Logan, you'll never guess who I saw last night," he said, his voice buzzing with gossip. "Who?" "Ava Sinclair. At midnight blue," cried her eyes out. My eyebrows shot up. "What happened? What do you think?" "She got dumped by that rich kid, the Caldwell cousin," my friend said gleefully. "I heard he told everyone she was just a gold digger, fun for a while, but not someone you'd ever take seriously. Said she was disgusting for selling out her best friend just to get with him." Ava totally fell apart, right there in the middle of the bar. I listened quietly, feeling nothing. I had seen this coming. Mason's only job was to break up Ava and me. Once that was done, he wouldn't waste another second on her. And Ava, having lost everything, was now the laughingstock of her social circle. She got exactly what she deserved. "Man, you really dodged a bullet getting rid of a woman like that," my friend concluded. I just smiled, saying nothing. When I got back to the villa, Jane was in the kitchen. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied back loosely, revealing the elegant line of her neck. The evening sun streamed through the window, casting a soft, golden glow around her. For a moment, a strange feeling washed over me. This cold, sterile house had started to feel like a home because of her. "You're back," she said, turning to smile at me. "Yeah." I walked over and looked at the pot of pasta on the stove. "This is dinner." We're out of almost everything. "We need to go grocery shopping tomorrow," she said. I watched her expertly drain the pasta, mix in the sauce, and dish it out. I found myself thinking that this kind of life wasn't so bad after all. After dinner, we watched some TV in the living room, as usual, before heading up to our room. I was about to grab my pillow for the sofa when the doorbell rang again. Not a polite chime, but a frantic, insistent buzzing. Jane and I exchanged a look. Stuart's voice came over the intercom, sounding troubled. "Master Logan, it's Ms. Sinclair. She says she has to see you." Before I could say a word, Jane was on her feet. "I'll get it." Her expression was calm. Standing on the doorstep was a haggard-looking woman. It was Ava. Her hair was a mess. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and she reeked of alcohol. She was a world away from the glamorous woman I once knew. When she saw that it was Jane who opened the door, she froze for a second, then her eyes blazed with hatred. "Jane, you bitch!" she shrieked, raising her hand to slap her. Ava's hand never made it to Jane's face. I caught her wrist just in time. "Ava, what the hell are you doing?" I asked, my voice cold. "What am I doing?" Ava yanked her wrist free and pointed a trembling finger at Jane. "Logan, this woman has been playing you. She's not who you think she is. She's a manipulative whore who will do anything for money." Jane stood there, her face pale, but her spine was straight as a rod. She didn't say a word. Is that right? I looked at Ava coolly. And what does that make you? Ava was speechless. You designed a trap for your best friend so you could chase a rich guy, only to be thrown away like trash. Ava, you're a pathetic sight. My words were like a knife, twisting in her heart. No, it wasn't like that. She shook her head wildly. Mason lied to me. It was all his fault. Logan, I know I was wrong. Please, can you forgive me? Let's go back to how things were. Let's start over. She reached for my arm. I took a step back, avoiding her touch. Ava, we are over. There is no warmth in my voice. I am Jane's husband now. Please, do not come here and disturb our lives again. Husband. Ava laughed, as if it were the funniest joke in the world. With her? Logan, don't be an idiot. She's only with you for your money. I'm the one who truly loves you. Truly love me? Jane, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. She took a step forward, meeting Ava's gaze head-on. Ava, search your conscience and ask yourself, do you love Logan, the man, or the future you imagined he should have? Ava's face turned ugly. What gives you the right to say that to me? The fact that we were friends for so many years. Jane's voice was quiet, but every word landed with force. You enjoyed everything Logan did for you, while constantly complaining that he didn't have money or connections. You claimed you couldn't live without him while you were flirting with Mason behind his back. When you planned that whole test, did you ever stop to think about me? Did you ever consider how hurt Logan would be if he was the good man you claimed to be testing for, only to be betrayed by you? You never thought about anyone else. Jane shook her head, her eyes filled with disappointment. You only thought about yourself. You just want a bulletproof excuse to dump him without looking like the bad guy. The only problem is you miscalculated everything. You overestimated Mason's character, and you underestimated Logan's resolve. Jane's words left Ava speechless, her face shifting between shades of red and white. You too, she stammered, finally spitting out a threat. You'll regret this. You'll both regret this. She shot us one last hateful glare before turning and stumbling off into the night. Watching her disappear, I felt no satisfaction, just a profound sense of pity. I turned and looked at Jane. She was still standing there, trembling slightly. That speech must have taken everything she had. I took off my jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Let's go inside. It's getting cold. She didn't object, just quietly followed me back into the house. We didn't say much to each other that night, but something between us had subtly begun to change. Lying in bed, on opposite sides of our pillow wall, I could feel that the air around the person next to me was no longer filled with tension and vigilance. The next day, word came from the family. A dinner was being held, ostensibly to welcome me back and introduce my new wife. In reality, I knew it was a trap. The entire family would be there. Jane and I were about to face an interrogation squad 100 times more difficult than just my Uncle Arthur. Are you scared? I asked Jane, who was trying to choose an evening dress. She met my eyes in the mirror and shook her head. Then she picked up a simple but elegant black dress, the most understated one of the bunch. No, she said, turning to face me with a small smile. If the sky falls, you'll be there to hold it up, right? I was stunned for a moment. Then, looking at the mischievous glint in her eyes, I couldn't help but laugh. You're getting pretty good at ordering me around, Mrs. Caldwell. Of course, she lifted her chin. We're partners, after all. The Caldwell family dinner was held at the old estate, a sprawling, historic mansion with manicured gardens and classical architecture. By the time Jane and I arrived, the circular driveway was already lined with luxury cars. A servant met us at the door and led us through a long, art-filled corridor to the main dining hall. The massive mahogany table was nearly full. At its head sat an old man in a tailored suit, looking sharp and radiating an aura of stern authority. He was my grandfather's younger brother, my great-uncle, and the current patriarch of the family. My Uncle Arthur sat at his right hand. As we entered, every head turned. A dozen pairs of eyes, curious, critical, condescending, and openly hostile, fixed on us. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a tribunal. Jane's hand instinctively tightened on my arm, her fingertips cold. I covered her hand with mine and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Don't worry, just follow my lead. I murmured. I led her to my great-uncle's place at the head of the table. Great-uncle, everyone. I'm back, I said, bowing my head slightly. My tone was respectful, but not subservient. My great-uncle lifted his eyelids, his cloudy eyes flicking over me before landing on Jane. This is the wife you found. His voice was old and powerful. Yes, her name is Jane. Miss Miller, is it? He said, staring at her. Where are you from? What do your parents do? Sir, I'm from here. My family is working class. Jane answered, her voice steady. Oh, working class? A cousin sitting nearby chimed in with a sneer. Logan, the Caldwells might not be royalty, but our name still means something. Don't you think marrying some girl from a blue-collar family is a bit reckless? Uncle, marriage is about love and compatibility, not about bank accounts, I retorted coolly. A likely story. Arthur finally saw his opening. Logan, don't think we don't know what's going on. You broke up with Ava just a few weeks ago, and now you're suddenly married to her best friend? Who will believe there isn't something shady going on? His accusation was met with a chorus of murmurs. He's right, that was awfully fast. I wonder what tricks this girl used. In an instant, all the hostility in the room was aimed directly at Jane. Her face began to drain of color. I was about to intervene, but she tugged gently on my sleeve. Then she took a small step forward, alone, facing a table full of our would-be executioners. Honored elders, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. I admit, the time from when Logan and I met to when we got married was very short. But a short time doesn't mean our feelings aren't deep. She lifted her head, her gaze sweeping over everyone present before finally coming to rest on my face. In that moment, her eyes seemed to hold all the stars in the sky. I love Logan, not because he's a Caldwell, or because of the inheritance he might one day receive. I love him simply because he's Logan. He was the only person who offered me a hand when my mother was critically ill and I had nowhere else to turn. He was the one who chose me and believed in me when everyone else doubted me and looked down on me. Her eyes started to well up. Perhaps in your eyes, my background doesn't measure up. But in my heart, he is the best man in the entire world. I don't know how to prove our love to you, but I can say this. Time will tell. She finished her speech and then bowed deeply to the entire table. The hall was utterly silent. Everyone, including me, was floored by her words. I stared at her, my heart pounding like a drum. I knew it was an act, but it was so raw, so convincing, it shook me to my core. When she said, I love him simply because he's Logan, for one fleeting second, I wished it were true. Well said. A voice broke the silence. It was my grandmother being wheeled in by a nurse. A warm, approving smile was on her face. Love has always been a matter between two young people. What does family background have to do with it? I think this girl is wonderful. 100 times better than that social climbing Avis Sinclair. My grandmother holds a special, revered place in the family. Even my great-uncle defers to her. Her word was final. Arthur's face turned the color of beet soup. My great-uncle could only chuckle nervously. Grandma is right. Well then, everyone, let's take our seats. Time to eat. And just like that, with a few well-chosen words and a perfectly timed assist from my grandmother, Jane had defused a bomb. Once we were seated, she gently kicked my foot under the table. I turned to look at her, and she gave me a playful wink. It said, see, I'm good at this. I couldn't help but smile. The rest of the dinner was uneventful. But just as it was winding down, Mr. Warren appeared once again. He leaned down and whispered something to my great-uncle. The old man's expression immediately turned grim. He cleared his throat, his eyes sweeping over Jane and me. We've just received a communication from the trustees of the family fund. His voice was heavy with an authority that could not be challenged. A supplementary clause in the will has just been activated. Logan, you and Jane must produce an heir within a year. Otherwise, the observation period assessment will be an automatic failure. Produce an heir? I thought I had misheard him. The dining hall fell into a deathly silence. Every eye in a room was on us, their expressions 100 times more complicated than before. The blood rushed to Jane's face, her ears turning bright red. She had probably never heard such a preposterous demand in her life. Great uncle, that's absurd. I was the first to object, shooting to my feet. It is a legally binding clause in the will, written in black and white. Mr. Warren stated, producing another document. Your grandfather was concerned about the continuation of the family line after your own father's difficulties in that regard. He did not want a repeat of that situation. My Uncle Arthur's lips were stretched in a triumphant smirk. He watched us with undisguised glee. This move was a checkmate. It was brilliant. Our marriage was a contract, a transaction. We could fake love, we could share a bed, but have a child? That was far beyond the scope of our agreement. It was a death sentence for our partnership. Logan, Arthur began in a tone of false sympathy. This is just your grandfather looking out for the family's future. You're young. A little effort in a year is plenty of time. Whispers erupted around the table. Well, this is a problem. Having a baby isn't something you can just decide to do. I'd say his inheritance is looking pretty doubtful right now. I looked at the faces of my so-called family and felt a wave of disgust. I pulled Jane, who was frozen beside me, to her feet. We're leaving. I didn't argue with them. I knew it was pointless. I led Jane out of the estate, the sound of their smug satisfaction following us out the door. Back in the car, Jane finally seemed to come back to life. She slumped against the seat and let out a long, shaky breath. Logan, were they serious? Did they look like they were joking? I started the car, my voice tight with frustration. The silence in the car was heavy. We both knew we were facing an impossible problem. Back at the villa, we sat on the sofa in the living room, a gulf of silence between us. The prenup we had signed sat on a coffee table, a monument to our irony. So, Jane was the first to speak. The agreement doesn't say anything about this. That means I'm not in breach of contract if I refuse, right? Her voice was small, uncertain. I knew what she was asking. She wanted out. My stomach dropped, and she had every right to. Having a child is a monumental decision for any woman, let alone having one for a contract husband she'd known for less than a month. It was insane. I was quiet for a long time, my fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the armrest. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out. Give up? If Jane left, I'd have to find another woman, marry her, and hope she could get pregnant within the remaining time. It was a fool's errand. It meant losing my inheritance. All my years of planning and patience would be for nothing. I couldn't accept that. Jane, I looked up, meeting her eyes. I won't force you. This is your decision. I took a deep breath. But I'm asking you to reconsider. I know this is an outrageous, even insulting request. But I need your help. My voice held a note of pleading I hadn't even recognized in myself. If we do this, if we succeed, I'll add another 10 million to the original million. No, 20 million. All I had to offer was money. It was the foundation of our relationship. Jane didn't answer right away. She stared at her feet, a war clearly raging inside her. The only sound in the living room was the slow, steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock. Every tick echoed, the pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes held not the disgust or revulsion I expected, but a complex, unreadable emotion. Logan, the money isn't the most important thing, she said. If we're really going to do this, I need a promise. What promise? I asked immediately. Promise me that you'll... She bit her lip, as if the words were hard to say. You'll be a good father. I will be a good father. I looked her straight in the eye and made the promise. I didn't know the true weight of those words, but in that moment, I meant them with every fiber of my being. Jane held my gaze for a few seconds, then gave a small, firm nod. Okay, she said. I'll help you. The weight I'd been carrying lifted from my shoulders. Thank you, I said. We are still partners, she stressed. The terms of our partnership have just been upgraded. I smiled. Right. Upgraded partners. After that night, the wall of pillows between us in the bed was quietly removed. Things were still awkward, but we had an agreement, and there was no more room for avoidance. My uncle, upon learning that we had accepted the challenge, didn't give up. He soon sent a new challenger. It was a Saturday afternoon. Jane and I were weeding the garden when Stewart approached us. Master Logan, a Miss Vance is here to see you. She says she's your new business consultant. I frowned. I hadn't hired any consultants. A moment later, a woman in a power suit and flawless makeup strode into the garden on a pair of stilettos. Her name was Catherine Vance, a top investment banker back from Wall Street, whom my uncle had hired for me to, in his words, help me get up to speed on the family business. I saw right through his plan. This Catherine was a pawn sent to drive a wedge between Jane and me. She was a woman who, in terms of family, education, and career, appeared 100 times more suitable for me than Jane. He wanted to make Jane feel inadequate, to make her give up. And Catherine was good at her job. She started showing up at the villa every day under the guise of work. She discussed financial news with me, analyzed complex market trends, and casually drop anecdotes about her time at an Ivy League school or her conquests on Wall Street. And then she'd shoot a look at Jane, who might be quietly reading a book or pruning roses, a look dripping with superiority that said, "See, this is Logan's world. You don't belong." It was starting to affect Jane. I noticed she was quieter. Sometimes, when Catherine and I were working in the study, she'd bring us coffee and then leave without a word, unlike before, when she might have lingered to listen. She was becoming more reserved, almost deliberately avoiding me. One evening, Catherine stayed late again. After I saw her out, I went up to the bedroom and found Jane already in bed, her back to me, pretending to be asleep. I slipped into bed as quietly as I could. In the darkness, I heard her let out the softest sigh. "You're awake?" I asked. Her body stiffened. "Yeah. Something on your mind?" She was silent for a moment before turning over to face me. "Logan, that Catherine. Isn't she a better match for you?" Her voice was laced with a vulnerability that twisted my gut. I sat up and switched on the dim bedside lamp. In the soft light, I could see her eyes were red-rimmed. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, my hand moving on its own to brush the hair from her face. "What are you thinking? I'm not being ridiculous." She pulled away from my touch and sat up. "She's right. You two are from the same world. I don't know anything about that stuff. I'm just getting in your way." "Who says you're in the way?" I looked at her, my voice earnest. "Catherine understands data, spreadsheets, and cold market logic. But you," I said, "you understand how to make this cold house feel warm. You're the one who remembers I hate onions. You're the one who leave a light on and a bowl of soup waiting when I have to work late. That's something the most brilliant investment banker in the world can't give me." Jane stared at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Logan, you—" "Jane," I interrupted, taking her hand. "You don't have to compare yourself to anyone. In my eyes, you're the best partner and the best Mrs. Caldwell. As for Catherine," I scoffed, "she's just a pawn my uncle sent over. Just watch. I'll send her packing." The next day, Catherine arrived at the villa as usual with a new investment proposal. "Logan, regarding the South District property, I believe—" I cut her off before she could continue. "Ms. Vance," I said, leaning back on the sofa with a lazy smile. "Before we talk business, I'd like to discuss a personal matter." Catherine blinked, confused. "My wife, Jane," I said, gesturing to Jane as she walked in from the kitchen with a tray of drinks. "She's been telling me how bored she is at home all day." Jane stopped, looking just as confused as Catherine. I waved her over, had her sit beside me, and wrapped my arm around her shoulders possessively. "So, I've decided that starting today, she will be officially joining Caldwell Industries as my executive assistant. From now on, all my work-related matters will go through her. That includes liaising with you." I watched Catherine's face turn to stone, and my smile widened. "So, Ms. Vance, from now on, please submit all your reports to my assistant, Mrs. Caldwell, for her review first. You don't have a problem with that, do you?" The look on Catherine's face was priceless. She never would have seen this coming. Forcing a Wall Street shark like her to report to someone she viewed as a common housewife? It was the ultimate insult. "Logan, what is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice tight with rage. "Are you questioning my professional competence?" "Of course not," I said, hugging Jane, my expression a picture of innocence. "I just believe in keeping things in the family. What's wrong with my wife getting familiar with the company's operations? Besides," my tone shifted, "let's not forget who signs your checks, Ms. Vance. My decisions are to be executed, not questioned." Catherine was so furious she couldn't speak. She shot Jane a look that could kill. Jane nervously squeezed my hand, and I patted her back reassuringly. In the end, Catherine swallowed her pride. "Fine, I understand," she ground out through clenched teeth, snatched her proposal off the table, and stormed out. As her car screeched away, Jane finally broke into a laugh. "You're terrible," she said. "It's the only way to deal with people like her," I replied. "But are you serious about me being your assistant?" she asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "I don't know the first thing about business." "You can learn," I said, looking at her. "I have faith in you." From that day on, Jane became my executive assistant. I started bringing home less critical company files and taught her, step by step, how to read and organize them. She was a fast and diligent student, quickly getting the hang of it. We spent our days working together and our nights living together, and the line between business partners and something more began to blur. After a few more attempts to undermine Jane with overly technical reports, which she managed to navigate with the help of my pre-marked notes, Catherine finally backed off. My uncle's plan had failed, but he wasn't done. A much bigger storm was gathering. Soon, it was the anniversary of my mother's death. Every year, I visit her grave. This year, I brought Jane with me. "Mom, I got married," I said softly, polishing the photograph on the headstone. "Her name is Jane. She's a good person. You don't have to worry anymore." Jane quietly placed a bouquet of white lilies beside the stone and bowed her head respectfully. The drive back was somber. "What was your mother like?" Jane asked quietly. "She was gentle and very strong," I said, my voice a little rough. "She left us too soon. If she were still here, she never would have let Arthur get away with so much." When we pulled up to the villa, Stuart was waiting for us on the porch, his expression grave. "Master Logan, there's a problem." "What is it?" A knot of dread formed in my stomach. "Your uncle. He's called an emergency family meeting. He summoned everyone to the estate." Stuart's voice was filled with anxiety. "He says he has important evidence. Evidence that proves that Mrs. Caldwell does not meet the irreproachable family background clause of the will." My pupils contracted. Arthur was finally playing his trump card. "What evidence?" I demanded. "For what I could gather, it has to do with Mrs. Caldwell's father." Jane's face went white as a sheet. Her father was the deepest wound in her life, a gambling addict who had racked up enormous debts and abandoned her and her mother when she was just a child. She had never spoken of him to anyone, and Arthur had dug it all up. "What is he trying to do?" Jane's voice trembled. "He's trying to prove you come from disreputable stock, invalidating our marriage in the eyes of the trust, and making our entire year's efforts worthless." My voice was like ice. "We have to get to the estate." I grabbed Jane's hand and started for the car. "It's too late, sir," Stuart said, blocking my path. "The meeting has already started. Mr. Warren is there." My heart sank. Arthur had chosen the anniversary of my mother's death to make his move, knowing I'd be occupied. He was launching a sneak attack. By the time we arrived, it would all be over. "What do we do?" Jane's eyes were swimming with helpless tears. I looked at her, took a deep breath, and forced myself to be calm. "Don't worry," I said, squeezing her hand. "He might have a plan, but so do I." I took out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hey, it's me. I need you to find everything you can on someone. Arthur Caldwell." A cold, determined light entered my eyes. His embezzlement, his shady business deals, every dirty secret he's ever had. I want it all. I'm going to ruin him. At the Caldwell estate, the atmosphere was grim. The long table was lined with the core members of the family. My uncle, Arthur, stood at the head, holding a thick file, his voice ringing with self-righteousness. "My dear family, I've called you here today to address a matter of grave importance to the Caldwell name. This woman Logan married, this Jane Miller. I've had her background thoroughly investigated. Her father, a man named Mark Miller, is nothing but a con artist and a gambling addict. He's wanted by the police for skipping out on massive debts. He slammed a copy of a faded wanted poster onto the table. Tell me, does the daughter of a criminal deserve the title irreproachable? Is she fit to be the wife of a Caldwell heir? Her presence in our family is a disgrace." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The faces of my aunts and uncles turned sour. Mr. Warren sat silently, adjusting his glasses. "Arthur, do you have proof of these claims?" my great-uncle asked, his voice low. "Of course." Arthur began passing out copies of his file. "This is all verified information, collected at great expense." As they read the evidence, the mood in the room darkened further. "This is Unacceptable. A man is known by the company he keeps. You don't marry the daughter of a criminal. The tide of opinion had turned completely in Arthur's favor. A triumphant smile spread across his face. He could see it. Logan stripped of his inheritance, and himself, finally, in control. Just then, the doors to the dining hall burst open. Jane and I stood in the doorway side by side. My face was a mask of ice, and while Jane was pale, her eyes were burning with a fierce resolve. Who says my father is a criminal? Jane's voice, though not loud, silenced the entire room. She walked steadily to the head of the table and placed a document in front of our great-uncle. This is the court order exonerating my father of the fraud charges he was framed for years ago. The real culprit confessed and served his time. As for his gambling, that is true, but every single dollar of debt he left behind, my mother and I paid it off. It took us years, but we paid it all back. She lifted her head and stared directly at Arthur. I fail to see what is so disreputable about my background. All I know is that I have never stolen, cheated, or hurt anyone. I have lived my life with dignity and honesty. Arthur's face looked like he'd just swallowed poison. He never imagined she would have proof of her father's exoneration. Even so, he still abandoned his family. That proves he has no character, he sputtered, grasping at straws. That's enough. My voice cut through the air. I walked to the head of the table and plugged a flash drive into the room's projector. Uncle, since you enjoyed digging into other people's family matters so much, why don't we take a look at yours? I hit play. The large screen lit up with videos, photos, and bank transfer records. It was a mountain of irrefutable evidence detailing years of Arthur's embezzlement, his deals with corrupt officials, and his schemes that had cost the company millions. This is slander. It's all fake. Arthur started to sweat, his face draining of all color. Fake. I laughed, a cold, harsh sound. Why don't we call the police right now and have them verify the authenticity of this fake evidence? Arthur's legs gave out, and he nearly collapsed. The rest of the family stared, mouths agape, their heads snapping between the damning evidence on the screen and the pathetic, trembling man before them. They couldn't believe the man they'd known as a pillar of the community was so rotten to the core. Arthur, my great-uncle, shaking with rage, slammed his fist on the table and stood up. You disgrace. I walked back to Jane's side and took her hand. Then I addressed the entire room, my voice ringing with finality. As of today, Arthur Caldwell is no longer an executive director at Caldwell Industries. All of his positions are terminated, and every cent he stole will be recovered. As for him, I looked at my uncle's ashen face. He can either turn himself in, or he can wait for us to call the police. The choice is his. My words were the final verdict. I knew, in that moment, that no one in the Caldwell family would ever dare to question Jane or me again. The war that had lasted nearly a year was finally over. I had won. Arthur's downfall was swift and absolute. He chose to turn himself in, a last-ditch effort to preserve some shred of dignity. I cleaned house at Caldwell Industries, rooting out every last person loyal to him. I officially took the helm of the company, and the work was relentless. Jane, meanwhile, turned the villa into a true home. She started taking business courses online, and the corporate documents I brought home were no longer a foreign language to her. Everything was falling into place. But we had both forgotten about one person. Mason, my cousin, who had been raised since birth on Arthur's poisonous belief that he was the rightful heir. His father's fall from grace had destroyed him, shattering his world and his sanity. One night, after a long week of catching up at the office, I was driving Jane home. It was late, and the city was quiet. We were on the Callahan Bridge, spanning the dark river. Jane was dozing in the passenger seat. I slowed the car, letting the soft jazz on the radio fill the comfortable silence. Suddenly, a blinding glare filled my rearview mirror. A black SUV was tearing up behind us, driving like a bat out of hell. My hands tightened on the wheel. Crunch! A violent impact threw us forward. Jane jolted awake, her eyes wide with terror. What was that? Hold on. Before I could finish, the SUV slammed into us again, this time grinding against our side, trying to force us into the guardrail. The shriek of metal on metal was deafening. In the mirror, I saw the driver's face, twisted into a mask of pure rage. It was Mason. "Logan, you ruined my dad. You ruined everything. I'm taking you and that bitch with me." His scream was barely audible over the roar of his engine. I wrenched the wheel, trying to shake him, but his SUV was heavier and more powerful. He stayed on us, relentlessly pushing us toward the edge. Sparks flew as our tires scraped against the concrete barrier. Beyond it was a 100-foot drop to the icy river below. Jane was white with fear, but she didn't scream. She just gripped the dashboard, her eyes locked on me. "Logan, watch out." In a final, desperate move, Mason pulled back slightly, then floored it, aiming for our rear quarter panel to spin us out and over the edge. He wanted to send us flying. But my car was built like a tank. The impact was brutal, shaking us to the core, but it held the road. Mason, in his rage, had miscalculated. His speed and angle were off. His front tire rode up onto our car's fender. The momentum, combined with the collision, turned his SUV into an unguided missile. It launched into the air. For a moment, it seemed to hang there against the night sky, a dark, silent silhouette. Then it plunged into the black water below. It was over in seconds. The silence that followed was broken only by the blaring of our car's alarm. Jane and I sat there, stunned, our hearts hammering against our ribs. My hand was shaking as I dialed 911. I stared down at the dark, placid surface of the river. The feud was finally, horrifically over. A month later, I went to the state prison alone. In the visitation room, I saw Arthur. He wore a standard-issue jumpsuit and looked 20 years older. His hair was almost completely white. The calculating, smiling man I had fought my whole life was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. We picked up the phones on either side of the thick glass. "I took care of Mason's arrangements," I said, my voice even. His cloudy eyes barely moved. "What did you say?" "His ashes are at West Hills Cemetery, next to your mother." Arthur's hand, holding the phone, began to shake violently. He stared at me, his eyes a storm of hatred, grief, and a devastating, empty despair. Why would you do that?" he rasped. "Because you're my uncle, and he was my cousin," I said. "This is our family's business. We don't air it out for the world to see." Tears welled in Arthur's eyes. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. In that moment, he wasn't my enemy. He was just a broken old man who had lost his son and everything he'd ever schemed for. "I did this to him. It was me," he cried, his voice choked. "I told him his whole life that everything should be his. I pushed him. I made him crazy." I listened in silence. All the anger I'd ever felt toward him had vanished. "Logan," he looked up, his eyes red and raw. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your grandfather was right to give you the company. I was blind." His mind seemed to snap. He started rambling, his words disconnected and nonsensical. A guard came over and signaled that our time was up. I put down the phone and stood. As I turned to leave, I took one last look at the man who had collapsed in a madness. I knew he would spend the rest of his life locked in a prison of his own regret. Walking out of the prison, the sunlight felt warm on my face. I took a long, deep breath. It was all finally over. When I got back to the villa, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Jane peeked out of the kitchen, wearing an apron. "You're home. Go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." Her stomach was just beginning to show, a gentle curve that softened her whole appearance. Her face glowed with a serene, gentle light. I walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist. "It's all over," I whispered, resting my head in the crook of her neck. "I know," she said, patting my hand. "Our baby was due in 3 months. The 1-year observation period was almost up. Our contract was about to expire." The thought was a splinter in my mind, unsettling me more than I wanted to admit. Our son was born on a clear, cold winter day. He was healthy, and his cry was loud and strong. When a nurse placed the tiny, wrinkled bundle in my arms, I was clumsy and terrified. I looked from his small, perfect face to Jane, exhausted but smiling in the hospital bed, and my heart filled with an emotion I'd never known before. It was a mixture of love, responsibility, and a profound sense of completeness. With the birth of our son, the 1-year observation period ended. I officially inherited my controlling stake in Caldwell Industries. Jane's mother, with the help of the best doctors, made a full recovery. Everything in our lives was perfect except for the contract that was about to run out. That evening, I came home to find Jane's small suitcase packed and waiting by the door, the same one she'd arrived with. She was sitting on the sofa, waiting for me. Our son was sleeping peacefully in his bassinet. "You're leaving?" I asked, a hollow feeling opening up in my chest. "Yes," she nodded. "The agreement is fulfilled." I walked over and took 2 documents from my briefcase. One was a set of divorce papers. The other was a cashier's check for $20 million. "This is what we agreed upon," I said, placing them on the coffee table. She stared at them, not moving. The silence in the room was deafening. "Thank you for everything this past year," I said finally. "I should be thanking you," she said softly. "You saved my mother's life, and you saved me." We fell silent again. There were so many things I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. "Don't go. This house will be empty without you. I think. I've gotten used to you being here." But I couldn't say it. Our relationship had begun as a transaction. Now that the transaction was complete, what right did I have to ask her to stay? Finally, Jane moved. She picked up the divorce papers and the same fountain pen we had used to sign our marriage contract. My heart seized. She uncapped the pen and, without hesitation, moved to sign her name. Just as the nib was about to touch the paper, I shot my hand out and covered hers. "Wait." My voice was hoarse. She looked up at me, confused. I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had once been filled with fear and desperation, but were now clear and strong. I took a deep breath and reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small velvet box. I got down on one knee. As she watched in stunned silence, I opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant diamond ring. "Jane," I said, looking up at her, my heart racing. "I know we started as a business deal, but everything that happened in these last 365 days, it wasn't fake. Not all of it. You're the one who made this house a home. You're the one who taught me what family really means. You made me a better man. So, this old contract," I said, picking up the divorce papers and ripping them in 2. "Let's tear it up, and let's sign a new one. This one has no expiration date. It has no payout. It just has me, Logan. Jane, will you marry me? For real this time. No acting." Tears finally spilled from her eyes, rolling down her cheeks and landing on the back of my hand, warm and real. She couldn't speak. She just cried and nodded, a fierce, determined motion. I smiled and slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. From the bassinet, our son stirred and made a happy little gurgling sound. A year later, we had a real wedding in a beautiful old church by the sea. Jane, stunning in a white dress, walked down the aisle on the arm of her healthy, smiling mother. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, bathing her in a heavenly light. I stood at the altar, watching the 2 most important women in my life walk toward me, and felt my own eyes begin to burn. I took Jane's hand in mine and held it tight. I knew that for me and my Mrs. Caldwell, our real story was just beginning.